picture taking. I'm sorry, no picture taking in the front. That's not allowed. No fun, no fun. Sorry. Okay, we are getting ready to start up again. So now you're screwing that up for the rest of it, right? Forever and ever now.
This is perfect.
That's perfect, yeah. Should have done that from the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, it was good over there too. People are raving about this.
Yeah?
Steve Kirchin's going out of his mind. You know? Yeah.
You tell me when you're ready. You got the clicker side. All right. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. I know it's always, Luke has the unenviable task of coming immediately after lunch in an Armenian crowd, which usually means getting everybody to settle down is difficult. But the drone of my voice will help. So, let me just, I'll tell you a little bit about Luke and why he's here. I met Luke actually, was it just last summer that it was? 2 summers ago. He was doing some research and wanted to take a look at some of the books I had on the books that Vahe was talking about, the village histories and other Hushamadian books and things like that, with a special focus on Gudin, but also some of the other material that was there. And so we had a wonderful visit with his family over the house, and it's another one of these connections like Mark and Tracy's, that we have this, my wife is French-Canadian as well, and a lot of us started with that French-Canadian research first because it's a lot easier. And so we get kind of sow our oats, so to speak, in French-Canadian genealogy, and Luke also has the same background again. So I'm not sure if I'm going to add a French-Canadian photo at the very end, maybe, I don't know, just for a small group of us. But he's going to talk a little bit about that sort of material that's available. So please welcome Luke Baronian. By the way, he came down just for this from Canada. So.
Hey, hi. Thanks all for coming. It's nice to see. Can you hear me well? Okay, it's nice to see that people came in such great numbers. What I'm going to talk a bit about today is it's a nice place in the program because right after Vahe, I'm going to talk about specific things that can be found in the Hushamadians, those documents that were produced by the survivor generation starting in the 1920s. And for those of us, the first 2 talks this morning, Tracy's talk and Mark's talk, were great. And both of them are from backgrounds of Armenians who came here to the U.S. In the very early period. That is, some of them came before the genocide, some of them came immediately after in the 20s. For those of us like me who are from families that I call second wave immigration to the continent, my family actually, I'm Montreal Armenian, so came to Canada. My dad is Egyptian Armenian. So those of us who, what I call the second wave, are those Armenians who spent a generation or a generation and a half in Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, those areas, and then came here. We don't have those, wonderful documents that Tracy and Mark talked about. Those documents are in Lebanon or Egypt or Syria, and they're in Arabic usually, okay, or maybe in Armenian if it was an Armenian church. But re-emphasizing what Tracy said, sometimes we have relatives who came here at the same time as our families went to Syria, Egypt, or Lebanon. And that was my case. So on my grandfather's side, there was the first thing when my dad arrived in Montreal in 1965, one of the very first things he did was go visit those cousins in Virginia who had come in the 1920s Okay, so in that spirit, I don't know if the clicker will work yet. So I'm sorry, this is a color talk, but for some reason the projector decides it's a black and white talk, so all right, go. And I'm very okay, there you go. So in that spirit, I want to dedicate this talk to two people who passed away way too young. The lady on the left is a cousin of my dad's, Patrick, just passed away near about a few months ago. And she helped me a lot on my grandmother's side of the family. And Baronian was one of those second cousins from Virginia who passed away in 2012, unfortunately. He helped me a lot in my own personal research on the Baronian side of the family. Now, what I do not want this talk to be about is about my family. It won't be interesting to you if I just tell you my family history, right? Well, although there are interesting anecdotes, but that'll be for tonight. But it is true that we can, this is the first genealogy conference, and it is true that we can only gain a wider understanding of the portrait of our communities by first studying some individual stories. So there will be a little bit about my family there, but also about other families that I've encountered in the past years. Okay. So my talk will go as follows. First, I will tell you a bit how I got into this, so that makes it fun. I will give you examples of general information found in local histories and survivor accounts, and how it's relevant to what we are looking for. A few case studies, and then I will end by addressing, well, what, in my opinion, needs to be done from this point on. Okay, so how I got into this. The first person was an Armenian teacher of mine when I was in grade 5 or 6, Digin Bakhturi, and I apologize if she's watching this later when it's on YouTube or wherever. I believe her last name was Vistakjan, but I'm not 100% sure, so let's just refer to her as Digin Bakhturi. And she did something very important. I was sick at some point in Armenian school, and when I came back, my friends told me, look, very, very important, by next Monday, you need to have the towns where your grandparents were from. And we know you tend to get into trouble with her, so make sure you get this. And okay, all right, that's easy enough. I know my grandparents are from Egypt. And so the next Monday, I showed up in class, and then, she was at me, and okay, well, you were absent, so did you get the information where your grandparents were? I said, yes, they were from Egypt. My grandmother was from Port City, my grandfather was from Alexandria. And she looks at me, you have to get the towns in Armenia where their families were from. It's like, oh, okay, so sorry, I will get this information for you tomorrow. Okay, so I go home, and I'm hoping my dad knows. He says, I think I know, but let me call him to make sure. And he takes the phone, he calls his parents, and then he tells me, Urfa and Gürün. And those names just immediately stuck with me. I still remember the image of my dad telling me those names. And all of a sudden, everything became very concrete for me. If there are educators among you here, teach at Armenian schools or Sunday school, Saturday school or wherever, this is a very important thing. In Armenian school they would often tell us about the great writers and the great moments of history. And this, if you're 8 years old, 9 years old, this often goes a bit over your head. But where your grandparents' families came from, this really connects to you. Okay, so this is something very important she did. And then a little bit later in life, I was probably 20 or 18 or young adult. I asked, in the early 90s, I asked my grandparents a bit more about their families. And these of them, I know why I'm so handsome. And my grandfather, I asked him, where your family's from, and I said, yes, Gürün, and do you know what their names were? And he only knew the names of his two grandfathers, because he was born, notice, in 1915. In fact, he was born in April 1915. And so he knew his two grandfathers. He had no clue what his two grandmothers' names were. He said, I know my dad's dad was Mehmet because my older brother is Mehmet, and we knew that he was named after our grandfather. And this is something important in Armenian tradition. The oldest son almost always bears the name of his paternal grandfather. Okay, so this, and that's a nice, well then your oldest sister was Shushan, wasn't your grandmother Shushan? He said, that would be logic, but I don't know this for a fact. And this told me that, okay, he wasn't just telling me anything. He said, well, I do, but we're going to teach, but I don't know Shushan. It should be her, but I don't know. And then my women, in these cases, perhaps because they don't get to transmit their name to their children, they tend to get a little competitive. And, you know, my family was important too, and then she starts talking about her family. And my grandfather was a bit annoyed at my questions. He said something like, Meran, you know, they died all of them. What do you care? It's the inch. And I kept asking him and bugging him, and my grandfather said, you should answer the kid. And then he gets up and he's, you know, a little, all right, come with me, you know, and he go right. And so he takes me to the basement, and what he does is he looks in the box, it's pretty organized, and he gets out this little document here, which you see a larger picture on the screen, Duty Nichols, and it was a little newsletter published by the Patriotic Union of Duty. This one, there was one published in the 30s, this one was published in the 70s and 80s, out of New Jersey. And he says, okay, this is where we're from, and inside there's some information about us. And on the flip side, he says this here, so the gentleman with the white beard, third, he says, that's my maternal grandfather. He was a priest. He was a very important person that was, okay, and it's even written on at the bottom. There's like, oh wow, a picture of my great-great-grandfather. Okay, so there it was, right there in his basement the whole time. Of course, well, I'll tell a little more about the title of my talk is Grandma Was Right, and there'll be a little bit more about my grandmother's side later, but of course, as I said, she would get a little competitive, and the next time I visited them, she said, okay, your grandfather gave you this little booklet, here's something from my town, and she gave this. The Urfa book was much bigger. But later I discovered there is a Geerden book that's about that size. My grandfather just didn't happen to have it. Okay, so let's start the talk properly speaking. So general information that we can find in local histories and survivor accounts. I'll be giving, as you can see, I won't just center around my family, but other examples from almost Historia or ACEC. Okay, this, for example, here is, but I will start with my town here. This, for example, is a very crude map of Gürün that was published, this one in 1930 in the first serial, the first newsletter was called Duty Nichols, singular, Duty Nichols is plural. That was the follow-up in the 70s of Gürün. And, okay, wow, this is very crude, but if you notice, there are little crosses, there's a little crescent, which must be a mosque. And there's the names of the various quarters they were from. So that existed in Gürün. So on the left you have Safso, you have Karatepe, at the top Karatepe, Eran, which is also called Ören in some documents. Shul, these were all the neighborhoods that were inhabited by Armenians. Sa is somewhere in the middle. Okay, of course you need to be able to read Armenian to know that, to realize that this is a map of Gürün and that these are the quarters of Gürün. By the way, the name in Armenian is spelled Gürün, but with Turkish vowel harmony, almost all Armenians pronounce it Gürün. Okay, now this is a map of the quarters of the Armenian quarter of Urfa, much more detailed. You can see, I mean, the streets there, even the little curves and the back alleys and whatnot are all there. And if you could, you know, if I could zoom in on this, it has, you know, various inscriptions about this church was here, this market, and so on. So it's much more detailed. So sometimes, you know, it's unequal. Gürün is a smaller town, Urfa obviously is a bigger city. You will have, you know, varying degrees of precision there. But those things are there, and they're important for genealogical research because you may find a reference at some point that some great uncle, you know, came from Shul, and like, Shul, what's Shul? And I thought it was from Gürün, and then you realize, okay, that was the neighborhood of Gürün. Okay. Here's another example. In the Gürün Hushamanian churches listed. So you had the mother church, which was in the neighborhood of Tsatso, that was on the left, the map I showed a little earlier. And then you had Sukebok in Beden, and Shulu also had a church. What it says in it is that it was rebuilt after the earthquake in 1875. Okay, so you have these little pieces of information in there that are relevant because you want to make sure that if someone says they were from that neighborhood, well, there was a church there at that point. And you may find even information like the following. In the case of Shul, it says that the family's Caprielia were the Caprielia family from Tsatso, and they were the masons of the church of Shul. And then the Radkayan were the carpenters of the church, and they were from Bud. So, you may find information about what your family actually did as a trade in those Hushamayans. And it mentions also they were Catholic churches in Sa and Shul. And here's an interesting piece about the Protestants. It says that they started out in 1875. They were mainly in Shul, but that all the reverends came from outside Burin, so that probably it was a recent phenomenon in Burin to have Protestants because all the priests came from outside. So this is probably an indication that it was a recent phenomenon in that specific town. Okay. It also, so to zoom in on, one of these churches, the church, let's say, the Sukbegutich, the one in Tsatso, where Tsatso was a part of Burin that had a lot of Armenians. It gives a history of the priests that were the priests of that specific church. Okay, and in some cases it even tells you, sometimes it tells you which year they were priests, and sometimes, usually it has the last name, except for the second one, Dev Pano, Father Pano. Sometimes it tells you which quarter they were from, or if they were from another city. The last one was my grandfather's maternal grandfather. Okay, here's another interesting thing now. Let's move to another town, Gesaria, City. This is a map that it maps. It's a linguistic map of Burin. I'm sorry, not Burin, of Kayseri. So what it does is it divides the area into three. Okay, and the top part there, which has the Armenian letter Aleph, it's the very, very top of the map. Okay, it divides it in two. On one side, on the left side, it says the Armenians who lived there were Turkish speaking. This is an interesting piece of information. If you happen to know your family was from that part, then you expect them to have documents in Turkish, or maybe family letters or something. Or if the opposite, if you happen to know that my grandparents spoke Turkish, they were from Kayseri, this is one of the areas to look for. They were probably one of the areas that are identified as Turkish speaking. Okay, whereas the right side was spoke the Armenian dialect there. And then in the middle there, that's the third part here, they call it the Tamarza dialect. And that's divided into two slightly different dialects. And then the lower left of the map, you have Armenian letter N. So again, there's an Armenian speaking part and a Turkish speaking part. Another example of something you may find is the ethnic composition of the town. So they were very open in those years about saying, we had Kurds in town, we had Turks in town, we had Circassians in town, Cherkess, or something like that. They will tell you about this in those books. And in the specific case of Gesaria, what I was really impressed to find was they specifically mentioned there's a group in town called the Harikoros. And this is a very little known group. Perhaps some of you have heard of them. But these are Armenians. They spoke Armenian. They were ethnically Armenian. Hoban Simonian, who Mark mentioned earlier, he's taken some DNA tests of people of high Ottoman ancestry, and they're very comparable to Armenians. And except they went to the Greek church. And they at the Greek church, there were enough of them in Caesarea to have their service in Armenian. Okay, and we never hear about those. We hear about the Apostolic Armenians, the Catholic Armenians, the Protestant Armenians, and recently we've been hearing about the people who converted to Islam to either save their lives, or there's a smaller group, the MGC, who converted in the 17th, 18th century. But there were also Armenians who converted to the Greek church, and they were present there at ACEC. In fact, some people I know, when they take the DNA test, they have some hits. They had some hits, but some of their not so distant cousins were high photo, so they never even heard that that group existed. One thing very interesting that you will find in those books, I don't know if all of them have this. There are, like Bahe said, there are over 200 of them, perhaps 300. But they often include something that I call a diaspora list. Okay, so in the one from the 1930s from Gudin, it lists the Gudensi men, women, and children who came to the U.S. by year. Obviously, they did this from memory, from who they knew, and so on, but when I compare it on Mark's database, it's never, it's often not exactly correct, but it's roughly right. I mean, most of the people are there, okay, and they're in roughly the right year. It also has a sub-list, or an added list after that, of those who left the U.S. So some came, and then some got their citizenships, a passport, and if they got a passport on Mark's database, they used that passport. What did they do with it? They went back sometimes to their village. And sometimes, unfortunately, they went back in the wrong year and they got, killed in the genocide. But you have a list of those who left and those who managed to come back to the U.S. after they left. So, for example, there was one guy I found who came in my family who came to the Boston area. Actually, first I think he came to New Hampshire to work in some company, Hovanes Bakavidian, and he had the right name. He was from the right town. He should be a relative, and he was a border with other people I knew were relatives. But then he gets his passport, and then he disappears from all the documents, and I have no idea what happened to him. Well, in the hearing, Ushamadian actually says that he went back to Bulgaria. He went to Bulgaria, where I knew there were some relatives, so he went, perhaps stayed there, and it said, and he died in Bulgaria. Why? It doesn't say why he died or how he died, but now I know why he's not in the records anymore, because he went to Bulgaria. It has a list, this particular one also has a list of the children of the immigrants who were born on U.S. soil. It has an interesting list also of those women who, they married non-Judencies. Okay. There's an interesting implication here, is that, so if you're a man and you marry a woman who's not from your town, well then you're in the first list, you're just a guy who